Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this fourth episode of the Mobility Talks, the digital event series launched by EIT Urban Mobility, where all aspects of urban mobility are considered and discussed in depth. My name is John Paul Judson. I am Managing Director of Now More, and I have the pleasure of moderating this event on pedaling the future, from pop-up bike lanes to long-term cycling policies. A topical issue, and not just because the Tour de France is starting in a couple of days, but especially because we have all been witness to an increased number of cyclists on the roads, and we have seen a lot of red painted bike lanes appearing in our cities. We are eager to know what the future will bring, and to reflect on these issues, we have today an event split in two parts. A first part with three different visions on cycling, coming from a local authority perspective, an academic perspective, and a business perspective. And then in a second part, we will have a panel of end users discussing trends, innovations, policies, and incentives in favor of the uptake of more cycling on European roads. But before I go into the detail of the topic, let me first maybe go through some housekeeping rules. Number one, for those who have been part of previous mobility talks, you may have seen a new look and feel, a new event platform. We're working hard to improve the experience for viewers of these talks. And I am also joined by a co-moderator, Bernadette Bergsma, who is Head of Communications and Stakeholder Relations at the EIT Urban Mobility. And she has the important function of managing the chat. It is through her that you will be able to also interact with us. During the event, we will be releasing some polls, and we'll start with a mock poll to see where are you joining us from? You know, this is a big question these days in times of COVID. People used to join from the office. Now, who knows? Let's see. So let's get clicking so that you start to get used to the poll function. Obviously, you can feel free to enter comments and questions. They will be anonymized by default, but you can add your name and your company if you feel like you want to be identified. You can also like a question. The more likes a question gets, the more it will have a chance of being raised in the discussion. And I will do my best to liaise with Bernadette to make sure those questions are being addressed. One word is that if you enter the event full screen, you will not be able to view the chat box and the polls. So that's really up to you whether you want to really focus on the discussion or if you want to keep a broader view on what's going on around the event. Finally, the event will be recorded and made available later online. And you can interact with the social media accounts of the EIT Urban Mobility, especially on Twitter with the hashtag #MobilityTalks. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the topic and see where the tendencies lies within the audience with a second poll, a real poll this time. I see that if I look to the right of my screen, that there hasn't been the first poll, but okay, maybe Bernadette also needs to get used to the tool, and I need to see where the answers are being reached. So far, no answers, so get clicking. The second poll is down to where you see pop-up bike lanes. Do you think they are a signal that will bring significant changes to cycling infrastructure in cities? And now I have the pleasure of introducing the first speaker of our event. He is the Deputy Mayor of Paris, in charge of transportation and public space, and he will be talking us through how Paris has become a cycling city and what are the ideas for the future. I have the pleasure of introducing Christophe Najdowski. Christophe, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation. I hope that you will see the presentation and that you will also enjoy it. I must say that I am not anymore in charge of transportation in Paris. I'm now in charge of green spaces, but we'll continue, of course, and we will talk about mobility today. I hope that you will see the presentation. Maybe you I don't. Maybe I have some problems, technical problems. But to show you the presentation, I don't know, Esteban or Jean-Paul, if you can help me for having it.
I think you're fine. We'll be launching the presentation
now.
Take
the control, and
yeah.
I can start. I think like this. Is it okay for you? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, we as local authorities and cities, we are facing the same question and same problems. Here you can see a picture of the Champs-Élysées 10 years ago with an overcrowded street and a lot of cars. You know that the system of mobility brought to us both congestion and pollution, and that we all are facing this kind of troubles in our cities. To give an answer to that, we tried also to build a public policy of transportation with developing, of course, the public transportation, the shared mobility, but also what we call the active mobility. That means walking and cycling. And during our last mandate that started in 2014, we had a motto that we wanted to start a pro-bike revolution by reshaping the streets and giving the space that was taken by the cars, and to give this space to other kinds of mobility, and especially to cycling. So these are some examples that we implemented in the last few years in Paris by removing car lanes and giving these lanes to the cyclists. We can have here 3 examples of the city of Paris with the implementation of new bike lanes that are nowadays very used on the bank of the River Seine, or even on the Champs-Élysées. That was not something that was possible a few years ago, but now we did it, and we showed also that we can do that that perspective, also to share the public space and to give more space to other kinds of mobility, and especially to cycling. This is another example of also the revolution that I was talking about. It is also what you are doing with the space you have in the city. Here is above the picture that was the situation before on the left bank of the River Seine. It was a motorway, and a few years ago we removed the cars and changed the space to bring it to people. And as you can see, if you have an infrastructure for cars, you will have drivers and cars. But if you give the space to the people, you will have the people, and they will use this space. About cycling, we also worked with the bike associations during the COVID crisis and during the lockdown. They worked a lot, and they proposed also to the candidates, because there were local elections in June in France, and they proposed to the candidates to build an express network, regional express network, called RER Vélo, which means regional express network for cycling, based on the same network of the railway network. So you have here a picture with the 650 kilometers of this network in the whole region. And this was very inspiring, because we established our plan based on this proposal, which was also adopted by all the candidates for the local election in Paris. We worked also by looking at the difficulties that were also signaled by the users, and also with looking also at the problems that we had with the network of the metro, to see where we had the most attendance for the people, to build our new network for cycling, and we proposed to have in double of the metro network, a network for the cyclists, to give an opportunity to use these new bike lanes instead of taking the metro, in the perspective, of course, of the COVID and the fact that a lot of people are not anymore taking the public transportation. So this was our project, and we built it with the tactical urbanism. So we had the project to build 50 kilometers in 3 months this summer, and for that we used the perspective of the tactical urbanism with building new pop-up bike lanes. So these are some examples of what was done these last few weeks or months in Paris. A new network, 50 kilometers more, with concrete blocks or removing the cars. You have, for example, here also a picture at the bottom of the Rue de Rivoli, which was an equivalent to the Champs-Élysées in the center of Paris. If you see a picture of this street a few years ago, it was overcrowded like where the Champs-Élysées 10 years ago, with 4 to 5 lanes for the cars. And now it is just streets for the cyclists, for the buses, and for the taxis. And it is a very also great success, because we already have 15,000 cyclists per day that use this new bike lane. So it shows that when you give the opportunity to people to have a good infrastructure, they are taking this opportunity, and they use the new infrastructures. So there is also a social demand. We saw it in all our cities. We tried also to make these pop-up bike lanes comfortable and not just for the cyclists. For example, you can have also a temporary bus stop that shows that we want also the same comfort for the users of the buses, not to be downed by the fact that we have a new bike lane that was built. So you have also to think about also the users of the public transportation system. To go fast, and also to say that what we can also think about these changes, we had about an increase by 30 to 50% of the uses of the cycling in Paris this last few months. Of course, we want, in our vision of the city, we want to build for the next years, we want to give, to make them permanent, to make these Corona bike lanes or pop-up bike lanes, to make them permanent, not to make them just for the COVID crisis, because the public now is using these new bike lanes. And if we want also to give a good perspective about the people, you need to build good infrastructure. So you have to have safe, wide, continuous network, and also these bike lanes must be built also on the main streets and the main boulevards, to give a real alternative also to the other modes of transportation. And with this, and also with some services, and especially parkings and also repair stations, you will have a system that will be able to give good opportunities to people to cycle. We have also a good, favorable background. Cycling is not seen as a political marker of one representative or another. Nowadays we have a consensus about cycling, and it is also the good moment to push to have more bike lanes. And we have also the work with the association, which is also, of course, very important. And if some decision makers are hesitating about do we have to construct and to build these bike lanes, or do we have to make them permanent, I would like to quote what Brent Toderian, who is a Canadian urban planner from Vancouver, said a few years ago. He said, "You can't justify a bridge by counting the number of people swimming across a river." And in the same way, you can't justify a bike lane by saying that there are no users today. If you build bike lanes, then cyclists will come. And at last, the last figure to explain that, you can see here what happened during the lockdown in April and May. You can see a huge drop in the use of cycling. You can see also that in December and January in France, we had a big level of use of the bikes because we had strikes of the public transportation system. So people went to the use of the bikes. And then after the lockdown, since May, with the building of these new bike lanes, we have a very high level of use of the cyclists, of cycling in Paris, around 30% more bikes than in the pre-lockdown period. So this is the time to build also a better future for our cities. The pop-up and the Corona bike lanes are a possibility for that. And maybe that it will be the conclusion I wanted to tell you today. If you build good bike lanes, good infrastructures, then cyclists will come. So we can make it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christophe. A very powerful plea for cycling infrastructure, and that Corona bike lanes only come in addition to that. There are a couple of questions in relation to commuting, and I think that's quite an important part of the policy around Paris. Do you have any ideas on how the infrastructure also extends outside of Paris and helps to favor some commuting by bicycle? Do you have any ideas on how to favor that?
Yes, the fact is that I talked about Paris, but we have now a regional policy, and also the local authorities that are in the outskirts of the city at a metropolitan level are also building the bike lanes, and they are doing the same things that we are doing in Paris. So this program is a metropolitan program. It's not just for the inner city. It is really at a regional level. And they are trying also to implement this regional program that was proposed by the bike associations of 650 kilometers of network, and it works. And what is very interesting is that some people that are living in the outskirts of the city and that are working in the inner city say that the frontier of the ring road, which is running around Paris, 5 kilometers around the center of the city, with the new bike lanes, it was like if this frontier does not exist anymore. So that is very interesting because the new bike lanes gave them the opportunity to use this kind of mode of transportation because they could not do that before. So now with the new infrastructures, they can do that, and it's not just for the people who are living in the inner city, but it's a policy for all the people.
Okay, and you haven't mentioned really the Olympic Games. I wonder, do the Olympic Games sort of structure this ambition as well on cycling? Do you see that it has an effect on Paris in that way?
Yes. Well, we can have also the perspective to build this network for 2024, and of course that we want to make the people go to the stadiums by biking. So it will be, of course, a part of also of the organizations of the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2024. So it's also a positive perspective to do that in a determined couple of years, and not to say that it will be maybe in 10 years. So it is also a good perspective to mobilize and to have all the people that support also this network.
Okay.
this project.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for that intervention. Kicks off the event very nicely. You'll also be pleased to know that more than 75% of people are actually attending this event from home. So proof that somehow the COVID crisis is still with us. At the same time, people are relatively optimistic. They say that cities are having to adapt to a totally new situation, and this will have an impact on cycling infrastructure. But there are still quite some people, 20%, who say that basically, yeah, we will go back to cars as usual in the future. So let's see if we can convince them otherwise as this event runs through. Thanks, Christophe. I will now move to Joost de Kruijf from the Breda University of Applied Sciences. You are cycling data intelligence specialist there, and you will be giving us a presentation on the importance of data in policy making. You know, maybe we don't really know how cyclists behave. Joost, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I will take over the presentation right now. First, for starters, my name is Joost de Kruijf. I work at the Breda University of Applied Sciences. That's a University of Applied Science in the southern part of the Netherlands, where we educate the majority of young professionals in the field of built environment. We are a member of the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and I myself developed the idea behind the Dutch Cycling Intelligence. Because we from Breda University know a lot for data-driven policy enhancement, where there is much more to know about cycling. So what I wanted to do is present to you some ideas we developed over the last years in the Netherlands, where we still are trailblazers in the field of data-driven cycling. So I'll go through the slides. I hope you will enjoy it, and it's more inspiring for all the ideas we developed over the last couple of years. The main idea was where can we go from pop-up to structural cycle policy. And if you look at the things the Dutch Cycling Embassy presents at the moment, it's already also great that there is so much attention for cycling all over Europe. That's a good thing. And what you then see is pictures on the internet of a before stage and an after stage where there's great cycling infrastructure available. And that's interesting because we, with our EU partners over the last couple of years, developed some new insights which I want to share with you during this presentation. A quote we normally use by looking to the actual behaviors of cyclists. We not only learn about their preferences and the restrictions in the city, but it also enables us to switch to customer-friendly cycling. And I think having a structural position for the cyclist, it has to be customer-friendly. So people feel safe, comfortable using the bike in daily life on a structural basis. What we developed over the last couple of years, because I want to tell you that I think there's nobody who knows everything about cycling. And what we developed over the last couple of years is the idea that you have 4 stages in cycling. You have the planning stage, the building and the design phase of infrastructure. You have to sell your product to the market, and eventually you have to evaluate it. And as we look at it at the moment, it's we are now in a really fast forward way building or constructing cycling infrastructure, where we then say, okay, that's a good thing, that's massive. Cycling is exploding at the moment in Europe, but if you want to do it on a structural basis, we have to look at cycling as a product. So we have to first plan, so we have to at some point go back to the drawing board and say, okay, is everything we designed fit for purpose? So we could go to the planning phase. There is something about selling and branding and evaluating. Because I can't tell you everything in 10 minutes time, we will go and start with our king. This photo was taken on the Rijnwaal Bridge in the Netherlands. And that's where the real story about cycling and our idea about cycling kicks off. It's really impressive. This was on the front page of the newspaper, the king cycling over the new cycle highway between Nijmegen and Arnhem. This was taken at Velocity Time in 2016, I think. And the great thing is, because my former speaker talked about building bridges, the interesting part is it's good when you stand alongside of the bridge, looking at the people passing, but what we then say is that the best place for the bridge. So what we did is develop some extra insights for policymakers, because if you have a really detailed network of cycling, it could be that if you develop better cycle infrastructure, people will take other routes, or it will be new cyclists. And where our intelligence kicks in is in the data-driven part. So we have navigation apps on the telephone, and the story now will focus on evaluating. There is a large program. There's a large program in the Netherlands called Tour de Force, trying to enhance cycling. And if you then think, okay, there is another Dutch guy telling EU about cycling, my story is that close by, because in the last couple of years, a lot of cities in the EU participated in the European Cycling Challenge. Other parties collaborated with the guys from Bike Citizens. The story I'm telling you is about the data-driven part, where we learned a lot, but there are already a lot of data available all over Europe to do the same. What we can see, this picture, and I'm not going to do it in depth, but this picture shows, based on the GPS data, where all the people come from and go to who make use of the bridge. So in the middle, it's the same bridge as was taken from the King of the Netherlands, and with the red lines, and I hope it's visible, is all the people cycling over the bridge. And then you see if the bridges are necessary to be cycled on, or if it's the only alternative for all cyclists and they have to take massive detours on the network. Because time is limited, I can't say much more about this now. This is a short illustration about cycling in the city of Nijmegen. There are 2 points on the network where people might think cyclists take the shortest route from origin to destination. That's the red point, that's the shortest route through the city of Nijmegen. The green point is another route. I will illustrate it with a photo. And the interesting thing is, if the infrastructure is comfortable enough and easy and safe, people are willing to take a detour. When we started our work, people might think they take the fastest route through the city, but that was not the thing we draw out of the data. So if the cycling infrastructure is of enough quality, people will take the more convenient and easy, comfortable routes. And for your understanding, we presented these kinds of insights to the Dutch governments, which you might assume they know everything about cycling. And they said to us, yeah, but your data is not right. That's not the case. People are cycling through our city. And then we said, it's not our data, it's the data of the cyclists. So we are then from that point learning that cyclists do different things than car traffic, or the assumption from policymakers. So that was a great insight I wanted to share with you. The next one, and this is the newest cycle highway in the down south area of the Netherlands. And the interesting part is, and do not be mistaken, it's a cycle highway, the newest one, so it's great, but we have to understand that this is just a high quality connection between two cities in the Netherlands being constructed. The introduction of the e-bike, we shouldn't forget, because the e-bike empowers cycling a lot. And what we then did is, from the planning phase, calculate the amount of cyclists who would go from the down south to the northern part. Because we can't explain it with these kind of graphs, we made it just a small illustration about it. This is the same area going from Tilburg in the south to Waalwijk in the north. And as we call it, it's cycle planning 1.0. Normally, what we could do is say, okay, what's the action radius of cyclists going from the city center of Tilburg to the rest of the world? And we then use the isochrones, but it's our round circles. And if you then are going to think about cycling and the impact of cycling and the amount of people which you could reach in a normal distance, you come to numbers and then say, okay, what's the potential of cyclists? What I would really quickly want to introduce is cycle planning 2.0, as we believe, because we make use of the data, we can, and I would prefer doing it all together, stop thinking about cycling in terms of distance, but we should rethink it in time. And if we do it in time, we could say, okay, that if we look at the connection, we have traffic lights, we have all kinds of delays on the route. So if we look at time, it isn't the perfect circle anymore, but we got a more dynamic travel time taken by the bicycle. So these are actually the same pictures as we have with the technical pictures, but what you now see is the pictures we can derive from the data. And eventually, if we either build a pop-up cycle lane or a bicycle highway, we have to take that into account too. What the actual radius is of a city through the urban or the suburban areas. And if you look at the reach of the impact of a cycle highway, it's massive, because now, for your understanding, there are 100,000 people more in reach due to cycling infrastructure measures in combination with e-bike. And that's something I think it's good to take in mind, because we are talking about the cyclist, and for us it's always in doubt, what is the cyclist? Is it the fanatic, the mammal, so the males in lycra? Is it the e-bike, the speed pedelec, the cargo bike? So what are we designing for? And if you go to the inner cities, the big inner cities in Holland, they're overcrowded by cargo bikes. So if we are thinking about cycle planning and structural cycle planning, I think we can't ignore the fact that there are more cyclists coming to the street in different shapes. And it's interesting because then if we take all the things we developed in the evaluation phase, you come to a really different kind of cycle planning for structural cycling infrastructure. So I think it's great, again, that we fastly build new cycling infrastructure, but I think with easy steps to evaluate the current use, we can improve on a data-driven way the planning of tomorrow's cycling infrastructure. I'm really going to go easily and fast forward on this. So I think, and that you could say to each Dutchman, you can't know everything about cycling because you can't know everything about planning, building, selling and evaluating in one time. It's good to think about the network perspective, because if you do not have a proper origin and a place of destination, you cycle from nowhere to nothing, and that's not convenient having a lot of cyclists on your infrastructure. The target groups, cycle types we talked about. The interesting part is cyclists behave different than car drivers, so do not be mistaken to copy all your thoughts about about car and car intelligence to cyclists, because they behave differently. And the interesting part is, which is ignored a lot but comes to mind more and more, is the increasing competitiveness if you connect the bike to the train infrastructure for the long trips. So between cities in a whole, and then reducing stops, and that's maybe one step too far for now. You can do with connected intelligent transport solutions a lot, reducing congestion. I will leave this for now. The interesting part is, as I told you, we are from a University of Applied Science. We use a lot of our student knowledge. We are fond of developing knowledge ourselves, and the combination is powerful. I want to thank you for listening. I hope there are questions, but this was in really short the things I wanted to tell you and raise interest about.
Thank you, Joost. Yes, you introduced a lot of insights there, notably cycling as a product. I think that could be a controversial statement for some cyclists, but certainly also broadening the scope of the cyclists on the roads. There is a question around the emergence of new forms of transportation, such as scooters, for instance, and other types of travel. Does that also have an impact on how these cycling lanes are conceived, because they would be using the same type of infrastructure in the end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a major challenge, and it's also in the cities. I know quite well also a challenge, who is where on the network. So it's also a question how we would rethink the urban space, because it raises new safety issues because of the speed differences on the infrastructure. So I can only agree with it. It will become more difficult, and we have to think about a proper solution, because it will mix more from pedestrian using steps, e-scooters, e-bikes, and how we should use those. And I do not have the specific answer to that, what the solution is. We only know that the raising speed difference on the infrastructure is one of the massive points of attention, because the most important thing for cyclists is safety for them to take up cycling.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joost, for that. I'm sure the panel will have a lot to react to as well. I then turn now to our last speaker of this first section. This is Miket Vossen. She is marketeer at Interpolis, an insurance company. And it's always interesting to get an insurer's perspective on a topic, because insurance tends to deal with the dark side of society, risks and problematic issues. So how do you view cycling and the greater uptake of cycling by even more people? Do you see any issues there, Miket? Take us through.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Miket. It's a French name, but I'm 100% Dutch. I live in Tilburg, so I'm a neighbor of Joost, very close to him. And I was just looking at some figures for myself. As a real Dutch person, I grew up cycling to work, cycling to school, to friends. And I think I made more than 100,000 kilometers on a bike. So what do I think of cycling? I really like it. It's a good habit. And if you look at this, is that cycling has many, many positive effects, as well as for health, as for our environment, infrastructure. There were just two people talking about that. It's wonderful. And also for our economy. So who can't be a fan of cycling? On the other hand, there is, as an insurance company, we see also that there are some problems we are facing in the Netherlands right now. And one of them is that last year, for the first time, there was a same amount of road deaths by car and by bike. It's for the first time. And another thing we see is that if you look at the real, the accidents that are severe, cyclists are involved in about 64% of the accidents. So I think there is massive personal drama behind all these figures. And on top of that, if you look at the healthcare cost due to these traffic accidents, that's 14 billion euros yearly in the Netherlands. And that's about 2% of our gross national product, which is quite a lot. So, I have to take this one moment. So what we are doing at Interpolis is we look at ways to reduce accidents. We do this not only for mobility, we do this also in other areas. And what you see here is that you can influence on accidents by making infrastructure better. You can make the bicycles more safe. And that are two things that will be done by many of you. But for us, that's not, we cannot go there. So what we do, we try to help our customers by becoming more safe. So as Jean-Paul told you, Interpolis is the largest non-life insurer in the Netherlands. It's part of Achmea. That's the holding for more power brands. And the specific thing Interpolis does is focusing on prevention. And that means saving lives, preventing accidents to happen, less damage, less hassle, so better for everyone. And the areas we do that in is mobility. That's what I'm in. I have some colleagues who do this for safety at home, some others for safety in companies, and a fairly new team is working on the well-being, because as we all know, the millennials, 1 in 5 of them are facing burnout, and that's, yeah, it's too much. We have to do something about it. So from our perspective, we can make smart solutions that will give people more self-reliance. And of course, we are not an NGO or a government, so we have a business to run. And the positive effect of less damage is that we can keep the insurance premiums affordable for all of us. So that's the reason we do this. What I now want to do is, how are we doing this? It's where do you start and where do you end? And what I've discovered is that this mobility and safety is huge. There are so many causes of accidents that we have worked for years, which is lovely, of course. And we took a look at the scientific research done in the causes of accidents. We put them in a paper like this, and we said, okay, let's do 1 or 2 of these causes per year, where we pick up the problem. What's the real problem? What's the analysis? What's known of it? What do people find themselves from it? And as we've done that, we go and sit together with the people from the target group for a week or for 2 days, whatever is necessary, to really find a good solution for the problem that they are facing. Once we have found that solution, we put it into a scientific experiment, because we do not want to put things into the market that do not have an effect. So if they come through the experiment with a positive effect, we put them into market. And yeah, I really like this way of working, because then what you do does have a result. Okay, this is a theoretical structure. I think it's best if I show you an example. As you all know, distraction in traffic is really a big issue, and really a big cause of accidents. And well, I can't ask you any questions, so I'll answer them myself. The biggest part of that is taken by the mobile phones, those lovely things we have that help us in everyday life, but are really, really a hassle in traffic. So I'll show you what we did for that for youngsters, very young people, the 15 to 17 years old. They are now on their bicycle, and their habitual behavior is to have the phone in their hand. It's like it's glued on it always. So 3/4 of the youngsters in our country is looking at their phones instead of looking to the road when they're on the bike. A bike doesn't go that fast, so the accidents are not very heavily, but in a few years they will be in a car driving. And if they are using the phone by then, it's really a disaster, because we see many, many, many accidents caused by the mobile phone. So that's why we thought, come on, we have to get these youngsters to be mobile free before they start driving a car. So that's what we started to work on, investigated the problem, and then we sat down in the 24-hour session with all those youngsters, which was really a lot of fun. I can recommend you to develop your ideas and products together with the target groups. And what we learned was that they absolutely did not see any problem in using the phone in traffic at all. So they had no motivation to stop using their phone. So we had to find another way to motivate them to stop using the phone. And in talking to them, going in depth, they told us, well, maybe I would do it if I got a reward that goes to a good target, like something that can help climate change stop. That's something that really bothers this age group, which I can imagine. So we made an application that if they use it on the phone, I mean, they put it on and they put away their phone, then they're gaining points, and Interpol is putting euros for Stichting Noordzee, and that's a party that takes out plastic out of the sea and out of the rivers. And for that, they really want to not use their phone on the bicycle. Does it have an effect? It absolutely has an effect, because half of the youngsters intended to stop using the phone in traffic when we introduced this application called PhoNo. The way we did it was by asking a very upcoming artist, a hip hop artist in the Netherlands, to make a song and a clip about this, because we thought, well, if Interpol is going to tell you what to do, that will have no effect. But this young guy did, and maybe it's more, it's nice to show you a little video on how this worked out.
In the Netherlands, we love to cycle, but we also love our smartphones. 75% of our teenagers use their smartphones while cycling without feeling there's any risk involved. At the same time, insurance company Interpol has noticed that over the last years, phone distraction has grown to be the biggest cause of traffic accidents. As their purpose is to prevent material and non-material damage, they feel it's about time to reach teenagers with an important safety message, ultimately changing behavior. Especially important since research shows that phone distraction on bikes is transferred to the car when teenagers grow older. But how do you get teenagers to listen to a safety message about their beloved phones? Well, by making it the talk of the town within teenage culture. The idea? We immerse teenagers in the thrills of a first love that suddenly scattered into tears caused by a phone-related bike accident. The story was told through a music film and track in collaboration with rap artist Snella, the rising star within our target audience. We made a short documentary that shows how the song is based on real stories of victims of smartphone-related bike accidents.
Ik kreeg een appje en ik heb mijn telefoon met 2 handen vast. Geen hand aan mijn stuur. En hij klapt volop bij mij op mijn rechterzijkant. Ja, dat is echt een moment geweest dat ik dacht van, alles is voorbij.
And we offer teenagers a free app that rewards cycling without using their phone, with a chance of winning a concert from Snella in their very own classroom. The music video was #1 trending on YouTube with over 8 million organic views and created massive social conversation. The song became a #1 hit and rewarded a platinum record in the Netherlands. National media picked it up massively and the cabinet complimented Interpolis publicly.
Je kunt het niet alleen als overheid, waar ik wel heel erg blij van word dat soort dingen ook gebeuren. Dus die mogen ook wel een compliment daarvoor krijgen.
Even schools and police began to use it as a conversation starter with teenagers. The campaign had massive impact, with a media reach surpassing 125 million. But more importantly, we wanted to influence teenagers' mindsets. Research shows that more than half the teenagers who saw the campaign solemnly swore never to use their phone again while cycling, ultimately preventing unnecessary accidents. That's how a love story helps Dutch teenagers to combine their beloved bike and smartphone in a much safer way.
Okay, thank you for listening, guys, and I hope it was a little bit of inspiration when you ever are going to think on changing behavior of the cyclists or the other people that use the roads.
Thank you very much, Meket, for that perspective. We don't always think of the insurer's perspective on issues, so it's interesting. And I guess for you, more cyclists on the roads does represent a possible risk. I mean, you need to make sure that everyone has the right behavior. The more people, the more risks. Maybe nevertheless there is a tipping point where there might be a less severity of accidents, right? And specifically in relation to cycling over cars.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Miket. So on this note of behavioral change, obviously there's something about behavior in traffic, but there's also about uptake of cycling. And this is really where we want to go with our panel in the second part, how to favor the uptake of cycling. Maybe we can kick off this panel with a poll to the audience. You know, what do you think is required to have a greater user uptake of cycling in cities? Is it user-driven, culture-driven, infrastructure-driven, policy-driven, or market-driven? It'll be interesting to hear from the audience. In the meantime, I am happy to introduce our panel. We have Henk Zwartouw, who is the Vice President of the European Cyclists Federation. Henk, good to have you with us. We have Kevin Main, who is the Chief Executive of Cycling Industries Europe. Good to have you too. We have Karen van Kleusen, who is the Secretary General of the Polis Network. And we have Daniel Thoma, who is Innovation Officer at the Budapest Center of Transport. And with the four of us, we will now discuss these many issues. I would first like to kick this off maybe with you, Kevin. We've talked a lot about this surge in cycling, more cyclists on the road. I guess you're in the market. You must have seen a surge in demand for your products, for your equipment. Is that something that you can confirm from the market, or do you see it as part of a broader trend in general towards more active travel and cycling?
Thanks. It's good to be here. I mean, Cycling Industries Europe represents a group of companies who make bikes, but also run services like bike share and digital services such as apps and counting on bicycles. So we have a pretty broad view, and we recently launched a market intelligence group, which is actually doing a kind of studies on what works and how it links to the market. At our launch event, we kind of heard consistently what I think everybody assumes is that there's an underlying trend in countries and cities where actually we as companies don't necessarily influence, but it goes back to governments, to people like Christoph are actually investing. Where we are helping a lot is, for example, the arrival of the e-bike means that people feel they can tackle longer journeys and more difficult journeys, such as hilly trips. And similarly, cargo bikes enable them to carry larger loads. So all those underlying technologies help support people who are willing to make the decision to cycle. But of course, COVID arrived. We, like everyone, saw a massive dip in business. But that quickly translated because people had the feeling they needed to move. And it comes back to physical activity. People's physical activity gave well-being. And as a sort of trigger from confinement, people came out of their houses all over the world. And what they did in many cases was beg, borrow, steal, let's be honest, or buy. And when the bike shops opened, they bought bikes and they've used bike sharing. And that has continued into the summer period. And there has been a lot of strain on our companies to supply. The one thing I would say, however, is that's uneven. It is very strongly correlated to places where cities reacted and made sure that there were safe places to ride, whether those are temporary or permanent. There are a lot of countries and cities where we have to say we're extremely disappointed because almost nothing happened. And oddly enough, the Netherlands has seen a decrease in cycling because people use their bikes every day to go to work, and people are working from home. So there's recreational use, bike sales are doing well, but it's not linked to a great shift to cycling yet. In fact, we're worried about an increase in car use. Because people want to avoid situations such as bike and train, which were part of the culture. So there's some really exciting undercurrents, some really exciting numbers coming from places, but they are matched by what cities and governments are doing.
And do you see that new types of bicycles, let's say, are gaining more traction than others? And have you seen a shift there? I mean, Joost mentioned the e-bike, but do you see a specific segment of the cycling market having particular traction?
The underlying message on e-bikes is huge. And that's not just this year. That's a long-standing trend. We actually believe e-bikes will not only grow as a share of cycling, but they are growing cycling and the number of bikes sold and the value of the market. So ultimately, they will drag everything upwards, because what's crucial is an e-bike allows someone to make a trip they didn't think they could previously make because they weren't strong enough. It would take too long. And so that's a switch to cycling. Equally in recreation, it's a switch to cycling, because let's face it, recreational cycling can be really hard. When you look at the television, the Tour de France, they all bike up mountains. That's hard. But actually, people don't necessarily want to work that hard. And a recreational trip on an e-bike fills a space, because you can get some fresh air and exercise, but you don't have to be an athlete. Yeah. So that's really quite exciting. It's exciting for a less mobile generation. And hopefully it's an instrument to public health, because we will restore people to mobility.
Recreation and commuting as well, I suppose.
Sorry?
Recreation and commuting, I suppose.
Yeah, well, commuting is, we want to bring people to that as well. But commuting, and there's a very high dependency on, the urban form, on where people live in relation to their jobs and on the city infrastructure. But I think the two can go hand in hand. Whether it's, and certainly during lockdown, we have some evidence from Cycle Counting that actually weekend cycling is up more than Monday to Friday cycling, which suggests that the recreational cycling is a gateway. Of course, what we want is both. And we want to see cleaner, better moving, less congested, more equitable cities. So we need to play the interplay between the two types of cycling. And something like bike share can be really powerful, because it can put a bike in someone's hands in the middle of the city when they wouldn't otherwise have access to a bike.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Henk, do you confirm some of these trends that Kevin has been mentioning? Maybe not everywhere, but at least in a lot of areas in Europe, a greater uptake of cycling.
Yes, we do. Maybe as a short word of introduction, I represent ECF, the European Cyclist Federation, which is the umbrella organization for 40 plus national and regional cyclist organizations in Europe. We have an office in Brussels, and we are a real consumer organization. So we represent the cyclists, the people who cycle. Yes, we do see the trends, but it's not only COVID. Of course, we are focusing on COVID-19 now, but these trends were there already before, triggered by the climate crisis, triggered by more focus on public health, the fight against obesity, etc. But this has been reinforced by COVID-19, but it's not something that just appeared in March or April of this year. That's the first point I wanted to make. Second is I couldn't participate in the poll because we panelists cannot participate, and I don't know the result. But when you read it out, I thought, oh wow, that's a real tough one to answer, because you didn't give the option all of the above. I think it's what we're seeing is an interplay between different factors. And I remember Christoph's quote by Brent Tuderian about the argument for a bridge is not the number of swimmers that cross the river. However, if you don't build the bridge, you will never know how many people will use it. So if you build it, they will come. Yes, but there's also the aspect of culture, there's the aspect of market, there's the aspect of policy, and a public health crisis like COVID-19 plays into all that. However, word of caution as well, we've been there before, particularly in the United States during the just during the oil crisis in 1973, there was an enormous uptake of cycling, like we are seeing now in Europe and on other continents. And when the oil crisis was over, it just fizzled out. And still, garages in the US are stuffed with bikes, 1970s vintage bikes, which have been standing there unused for 40 years. And that is something that we really need to avoid this time round. And I think we can, because the situation is really different, because policymakers in Paris, in London, in Berlin, in Rome, all over the place, they are reacting, and I don't think they will give up on this, because everybody is seeing the beneficial effects on the livability of our cities, on public health, on air quality, on the environment, on climate, etc. I think we're all seeing that cycling, we are on the right side of history.
Yeah, so you have witnessed short-term trends before, but probably this time around, there's already a greater awareness of policymakers and other kinds of decision makers that could make this a much longer-term reality. At least that's what you hope.
That's what we're working for.
Yeah. Okay. And if I go now to Karen, you're representing a network of cities. Do you also recognize this shift in behavior with more cyclists on the road, maybe more pressure from citizens on their public authorities to say, we need more options for cycling? Do you see that within your network or already?
Yes, absolutely. So cycling is hot, that's clear. But as Henk was saying, this is also not new. This trend of giving the streets back to the people, basically, is a trend that has been initiated in many cities for a couple of years now, and luckily so. So reducing the car use in the city center in favor of active travel, but also public transport, is something that many of our cities have been working towards for several years. And of course, we have to redesign our cities accordingly. And the most powerful tool that cities have is actually the fact that they are in charge of urban space. And urban space is valuable, urban space is scarce. So by allocating space to certain modes or taking space away from other modes, they also decide which modes they want to prioritize in the urban environment. And what became very apparent in this COVID-19 crisis is how unfair the allocation of space has been for decades in our cities. We saw during the lockdown in particular, wide empty lanes because people were not allowed to go out anyway. So the car lanes not being used, but people in many countries could still go out for being physically active, as Kevin highlighted, and started to walk and cycle. But they had to do it on a very narrow space, which then again ran into physical distancing challenges. So what is being accelerated is this trend towards giving the space back to the people by the COVID-19 crisis. And we see that finally this unfair allocation of space is being remedied. So what was needed for physical distancing, we hope can stay for many other reasons as well on a more permanent basis. So the thing is now to make these temporary changes permanent, as well as also Christophe was highlighting for the case of Paris, where they are doing very well. And we're also very proud to have Paris as a very active policy member. And I think there are a number of triggers which can help us to be optimistic in terms of making this temporary change permanent. As Henk was also warning us about, it's been there in the past that we had this change and then we didn't manage to capitalize it for the longer term. So which triggers do I see? I see that cities which are particularly doing well in this context are those which have very good sustainable urban mobility plans in place with a long-term vision spreading across several years. And what they have basically done is accelerate and fast-track measures that were planned anyway and implement them not just in a couple of years as initially was intended, but in a couple of weeks and months. So that also increases the likelihood of those measures sticking around. But two important other triggers I would like to highlight is what behavioral experts always tell us is that we can change deeply rooted habitual behavior in periods where there is a life-changing moment. Getting married, having babies, changing jobs, but also, I believe, entering a health crisis such as COVID, where people were temporarily forced to try other modes of transport. And that's what we need to make good use of. make sure that this temporary change becomes permanent. And what again is going to help us then is the fact that we are really in an incredible street experiment. We are in a huge sandbox that we can play in, because we are introducing measures temporarily that people can experience in real life. And we know from other pilots, etc., that the best way to win the hearts and minds of people is by letting them experience and trial measures in real life. So that's also a good way to get the citizens on board and to get public support for measures which are usually very politically sensitive, and that's taking space away from the private car. Look at what is happening with parking. Parking space is being reallocated to have bigger terraces at bars, to introduce parklets. So it's possible in certain conditions and in certain contexts, and we really should make sure that we capitalize on this, because finally, we should not forget about all the other crises that we have to deal with. We have to put things into perspective as well. People are dying from COVID, yes, and that's very sad and unfortunate. But climate change, air pollution, road safety challenges, the lack of physical activities, these are bringing many deaths and injuries to our society as well.
And cycling has its role to play in responding also to those
absolutely.
policies.
So cycling, we still have a huge untapped potential for cycling, and there's so much more we can do. And also with e-bikes, because as Kevin mentioned, this is tremendously extending the potential range of cycling. If we look at how many trips below 5 kilometers are still being done by car, there's still a lot of potential shift out there. And that's interesting also that cities like Milan, like Rome, which you cannot blame of being cycling cities, are also now looking at this potential of cycling and are looking at how they can shift people away from the car and from temporary public transport, because there is the capacity challenge linked to COVID, of course.
Okay, yeah, so COVID acted as a sort of a shock therapy in a way. It gets people on the streets experimenting with new modes of transport. Daniel, how does that look then in Budapest? I see that from the results of the poll, infrastructure remains, the big thing, according to most people. More than 50% say, change is infrastructure driven. In relation to what Karen has just explained on these different triggers, how do you see that situation evolving in a city like Budapest that you're working with on a daily basis?
Yes, in the springtime, the use of public transport, when the first restrictions were implemented, dropped by 90%. To a 10% of their daily basis. So the first the motivating element was the fear in congested areas like metro cars, tramways, buses. And also we could see a drop in car use. It dropped to a 20, 30, 40%, depending where the road was. But we could see that the number of cyclists in the bicycle counters was the same as in 2019. So bicycling was rising, and many new users started using this mode of transport. So we could say that COVID-19 was good for bicycling in Budapest. And after these happenings, the city decided to install these bike lanes. On the one hand, because of the bicyclists, because of that this mayor right now is in favor of cyclism, but also because of the empty roads led to higher speeds of cars, and it was dangerous. And right now, it's interesting because one of our ring roads also have a bike lane, a temporary bike lane right now. It's now being decided what to do with it. Our mayor will decide in this moment. So we are interested.
Yeah, and do you see in developing plans to favor more cycling? Do you see a lot of resistance inside Budapest from other groups?
Right now, there was a survey, a representative survey around among Budapest people, Around half of them are in favor of bicycle lanes, and around half of them are against to remove lanes of motorized traffic, not against bicycle lanes, but against of removing space for cars. So we could say that most of the inhabitants here are in favor of supporting cycling, but many say that without any lane removing of cars, but the space is limited, so we have to choose sometimes.
Yeah. It's difficult to have everyone on the same lane. In terms of some of the innovations that you were talking about, Kevin, because you said you're not just representing equipment, you're also representing companies that are developing, services around cycling. How do you view the industry's role there in promoting new types of business models that can really be, reliable alternatives to engine-based models in cities?
Well, I think, we fundamentally were founded on the principle of partnership, so that we work with companies across what might broadly call cycling, from consultancies to bike makers to bike share. But we also know, if we're going to grow cycling, it's a partnership with Karen and her colleagues and Daniel in the cities, because it's their space we're going to inhabit. It's their policies that are going to go forward. And for example, a bike share business, at its absolute core, it's a partnership with a city that hosts a bike share operation, and that kind of has to work. And if you put in, one of my passionate subjects is kind of low emission zones. If cities reduce access to trucks, cyclists are safer, but they might ride more. The streets are cleaner. There is less noise. There's less wear and tear. But you've got to have a relationship with the city to allow cargo bikes in. Or, you've got to put bike share on the streets to facilitate transitions for multimodal transport, because we do actually want public transport to recover. The nightmare is that the kind of COVID effect drives people back to the private car. And I think the other aspect I would say in terms of partnerships is almost a political partnership. And I think it comes back to the EIT Urban Mobility that's hosting us today. Automotive mobility, as we'll call it, is deeply entrenched politically, and the connections are there and the history is there. And that's going to take a great big united push. The cycling industries, yes, we bring products that make cycling easier, and we are absolutely certain that more people can cycle today than ever could before. They have the option. If they can choose an e-bike, if they want to move their family, they can choose a cargo bike. If they have to take the train to town, they can choose a shared bike. But, bike share is not in every city in Europe, and it should be. We know there's a big cutoff point below 100,000 citizens where bike share is much less common. So we're looking for this grand coalition, which we have to have with like-minded cities, with like-minded politicians, and with people who genuinely believe there is no going back, whether it's in the short term, going back 6 months. And we are not going to repeat, absolutely agree with Henk, what we did in the 70s, which is go through rolling crises, because we are not going to repeat that, because we have the alliances now. We have the collaborations. And what I hate to hear is people tell me, you guys in cycling were lucky, the sun shone in COVID. It is not luck, it is relationships, it is good lobbying, it is great products, and it's positioning, and we have to build on that now, and we have to build on it right now.
And Karen, Kevin's talking about this public-private partnership, the importance of certain policies beyond just saying, cycling is good, but low emission zones and other types of actions. But do you also see the private side of this public-private partnership emerging in the way cities are developing these policies, working with, let's say, the cycling sector? Do you see these kinds of relationships as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do cooperate indeed a lot with Kevin as well. And we believe that, cities have had to reposition themselves because they're no longer solely responsible or at least they're not the only actor anymore when it comes to providing mobility services in the urban environment. We have many private players that have come to the market, that have entered the market over the last couple of years. What is important from our perspective is also to regulate these services in order to make sure that they play the role that cities want them to play. In terms of cycling, of course, it's quite straightforward. We all love cycling, and it has a great role to play, but you also have, for example, to make sure that in case of free-floating, privately run schemes, they don't cause problems in urban space. This is something that also has popped up when we talk about e-scooters, where there is a more controversial dimension as well, in the sense that they still have to prove that the modal shift they bring about is the modal shift that cities want to look for. And we don't want to move from walking or cycling to e-scooters. We want to move away from the private car onto e-scooters. In that case, it's okay. But in order for that to happen, we also need the public policy goals to be at the center of these mobility services. And we need to align those goals with the commercial goals that they have. And that's what we have been working towards a lot as well. The other point when it comes to public-private cooperation is that also these services have been hit hard by the current health crisis and the resulting economic crisis. And I think cities have to be aware that if these services do play a positive role in the urban mobility ecosystem, they should consider subsidies or at least new types of business models where they maybe subsidize certain trips if they help them to deliver the mobility policy goals that they have put forward. Because it's very difficult to get rich from sustainable urban mobility. We also see that public transport needs to be subsidized, for example, but we also see that the private sector is very agile and dynamic and innovative, and that might also bring a lot of benefits compared to the traditional type of fully public bike sharing schemes, which sometimes cannot act fast enough. So I'm really in favor of these new types of PPPs and new business models that we should explore and that we are exploring with our cities.
Okay, and Henk, how much are users involved then in all of this evolution? You know, with all the different types of cycling equipment at their disposal, cycling models, shared bicycles, etc.
Well, that's what's so great, that the options for users to choose, they are increasing every day. Every day there are more different types of bikes for different purposes available. Different types of electric support, different types of cargo transport possibilities. So that's not the problem, and the industry is really taking up the challenge. And that's also an important point to make, which was made already by Karen and by Kevin, that we should not let consumers and producers be played off against each other, or industry and consumers. The same for everyday cyclists, recreational cyclists, and racing cyclists. And pedestrians even. We're in this together, and if we stick together, then I think we can pull this through. The other good thing is, in reaction to Karen, that fortunately, investment in cycling is relatively cheap compared to investment in car infrastructure or rail infrastructure or other public transport infrastructure. You get a lot of bang for your buck as a public body investing in cycling. So in that sense, the economic crisis, which will probably follow the COVID crisis, may even help us. But there is so much coming on the market. If you see last mile delivery in places like Brussels or Amsterdam or London or Berlin or Paris, very soon there will be no need for trucks to enter city centers, except perhaps for delivering building materials. That's still a bit of a challenge, perhaps. But this whole last mile delivery, which now is being done mostly by what we call wide vans, that will be taken over by electric cargo bikes. It's cheaper, it's more efficient, you get closer. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, so a big evolution. I have to say, white van drivers are very well known for not driving very well. So that would be quite a good thing.
I didn't mention the drivers. I'm just talking about vans.
I know. I'm allowed though.
The cargo bike drivers who don't drive very well as well. So.
And Daniel, when reshaping the city, I mean Budapest, you will be encountering issues. how do you approach this in terms of, innovative urban planning, overcoming certain challenges with, other groups thinking that it's not such a good idea? Are you looking at other experiences in other cities? How do you move that agenda locally?
Of course, we are looking around. Our group is a bit kind of our strategic group is looking around sometimes. Okay, I'm just here from April, so my colleagues mainly can travel to conferences and something like that. So we are always looking around and trying to follow the trends and of course create new ones if it's possible. We had a poet 100 years ago that who said that look at Paris, what's happening there? So with free birds, and maybe we can do the same right now in many ways.
Yeah,
it can be an example.
Karen, do you have an example that comes to mind where a city really innovated around a problem where there was maybe a lot of resistance to this kind of change of more infrastructure, more cycling, and they managed to twist the policy around? Are you aware of any of such example?
Well, there are many cities that have been investing, as I mentioned earlier, in redesigning their streets and making them more nicer places to be in and live in and move around in. If we just look at Brussels, which is not the usual example when it comes to cycling, they have started this cycling movement a couple of years ago, and we know Brussels is a car-centric, congested city. But they have been investing in infrastructure. They've also really capitalized on the COVID crisis in terms of accelerating plans that were in the pipeline. And we see that something's really happening there. Of course, we cannot compare it to the numbers in the Netherlands just yet, or in Denmark. But cycling has gone up quite significantly over the last couple of years. And it's really a combination of awareness raising, a very nice Bike Brussels campaign with infrastructure investments and bold political decisions where you have politicians which are not afraid to take measures which maybe are unpopular at first, but then when people see them work well in practice, the hearts and minds are won, as I mentioned earlier. But what we need in any case is always a combination of carrots and sticks. We can incentivize cycling, but what we mainly also have to do, well, not mainly, but equally to the same extent, is disincentivize the unsustainable modes. What we still don't do sufficiently is internalize the external costs linked to car drivers and to car use in cities and all the negative impacts they have on our societies, on our environment and on cities. We should make that more explicit, and we should work with urban vehicle access regulation, with pricing schemes, which are very sensitive from a political perspective as well. But we also see that making a drastic choice for cycling does get you re-elected. And the perfect example is in the room. It's the example of Paris. And they just got re-elected. So congratulations for that. And I think it's the perfect proof that you shouldn't be afraid of taking bold decisions. And we have other examples. We have Seville in Spain, which a couple of years ago really invested a lot in infrastructure as well and has seen this reflected in an increase in cycling numbers too. But again, carrots and sticks and political courage. That's what it always comes down to.
Would you have another example, Henk, as from your user perspective, another city where there's been a specific action that has transformed the way of living inside the city with bicycles?
Well, there are plenty of examples from the 70s in the Netherlands. Groningen is a great example. More present. It's Utrecht. But it's also, but I'm speaking from the Netherlands and I've been living in Denmark, and it's not overnight. This is a long-term project. It takes, in many cities in the Netherlands, it took 30, 40 years. Of course, this can be sped up, and it will be sped up if you see how fast a city like Paris has been moving over the past 10, 15 years, perhaps. If you haven't been to Paris for 15 years, you won't recognize it, the traffic patterns. But I would like to put in a special mention to the city of Ghent in Belgium, where they also have come. I see Karen nodding. they have come a very, very long way in a relatively short time.
Okay, so a shout out to Ghent.
Yeah. And they also got re-elected.
And they also got re-elected.
And they got re-elected.
Okay, so as we're
in Paris, they got re-elected as well.
As we're getting towards the end of this event, sadly, and there are a lot of things that we can discuss, but I just wanted to maybe wrap up with each panelist. I know that Henk especially is not a big fan. He says, you know, there's all options are important when making changes. But nevertheless, I will ask each panelist to come up with the one single recipe that will get a local politician re-elected locally when favoring cycling. And I will only give you 30 seconds. So I will start with Henk, your final word, the magic recipe for a long-term policy. It starts now.
Get everybody on board. You need ownership of the users. The people have to move around the cities. In the end, everybody will see that a cycling city is a more livable city. So organize your support.
Thank you, Henk. Thank you very much. You were a great panelist. Round of applause for you. And now I turn to Karen for a 30-second magic recipe.
I would say in the current context, never waste a good crisis. The momentum is there, the triggers are there. Please make good use of it. Combined with political courage and political will, this should get us very far. And then again, also, we need to join forces indeed. Public-private cooperation is key.
Thank you very much. Under 20 seconds. You were a great panelist. Thank you so much, Karen. Daniel, are you ready for your 30-second challenge?
Yes.
Magic recipe.
Yeah, here in Budapest, there's a plan for a 15-minute city. It exists around 20 years ago. So my recipe is to start and do it.
Okay, to start now for a 15-minute city in the future. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for being with us on the panel. And the last word for Kevin. Kevin, are you ready? You have 30 seconds.
The toughest job is to start. Our toughest job is in the cities where there are low levels of cycling. You can't go to Dutch levels, Danish levels, but you can pick a street, you can pick a neighborhood, you can pick a city center, you can transform it. And every bit of evidence says that when you're bold enough to do that, people turn around and go, now I understand. Don't overthink it. Get a concrete example in front of your citizens. We'll do the rest. We'll follow behind you.
Just do it.
Perfect. That's actually spot on 30 seconds. It's almost like you rehearsed it. well done, Kevin. You were a great panelist. Thank you, all of you, for all your great contributions. I hope it was interesting also for our live audience. It's always difficult when we're online to feel the pulse of the audience, but I certainly very much enjoyed the discussion. So thank you very much. I now will hand over to Edwin from the EIT Urban Mobility team. He is Managing Director of the Innovation Hub West, and he will take us through some concluding remarks. Edwin, over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. And as already introduced, Managing Director of Hub West, where actually the innovation and the impact in our European cities will take place within the triangle of knowledge. So the triple helix of cities, industries, academic and research. And in addition to this, and we heard this a lot during this process today, the citizens of the cities themselves. These are the end users of urban mobility. So today we had a fruitful discussion on a great subject, which is actually close to my warm and healthy cycling heart as a Dutch cyclist, battling the future from pop-up bike lanes to long-term cycling policies. So pretty sure, while being hopeful as well, there will be a change post-COVID to a more active mode of transport, which is one of the key areas to improve the city urban mobility, like health, congestion, pollution, and while freeing up the space where we can move, social interact, work, relax, and improve our city lives. So we are keen to look into the near future, whether the changes are light, medium, or major changes, and will become a long-term policy and change our human behavior from a car-centric system to a more active mode of mobility as cycling and walking. So let's wrap up part one quickly. Cycling in the future urban mobility mix, which was about the vision of three specialists. in various fields about pedaling. So it was around the city of Paris, Breda University of Applied Sciences on cycling data, and Achmea Interpolis insurance from a health and safety perspective. So first of all, my thanks to Christoph Najowski as a Deputy Mayor for Green Spaces for sharing your experience from the city of Paris and your thoughts for the future on Paris from your point of view, and how you will continue to invest and adapt to accommodate for a more active mode of transport, walking and cycling. And you did it already and gave more space to, for example, cycling and walking on the left bank of the Seine. And as long as you make sure there's a safe infrastructure and you can provide an alternative, then people will use it. And the plan of RER Velo, using cycling lanes the same as the RER railway network, a very inspiring example for other cities. And as you quoted from someone in Canada, you can't justify a bridge by counting the people which are swimming. So you need to make sure there's infrastructure in the center as well in the regional or outskirts level. So, and you said there's 40% more cycling during COVID, which is great. So pretty sure the Olympic Games in 24 will drive the agenda on cycling to improve transport to the stadiums even more. Secondly, thanks to Joost from Breda University of Applied Sciences for putting forward the importance of data to drive policies and challenging assumptions when it comes to cycling behavior and practice, and the cycling ways in the Netherlands. So most probably the cycling highways as a Dutch phenomenon has a potential to replicate this type of infrastructure, but it needs to be very user-friendly. And we saw a lot of interesting illustration about cycling data using, for example, a bridge like the Dutch King did already, choosing an alternative route of choice. And this, since cyclists do different things and behave differently than car drivers, for example, regarding choosing their routes. So stop using and measure distance, but use travel time. That is a takeaway as well. So, and you need to focus on types of cyclists. There are important differences between them. So thanks to Miguel Vossen, having cycled more than 100,000 kilometers on a bike during her life. That's what I noted this morning. So Miguel is from Achmea Interpolis, a very important core partner of EIT Urban Mobility in the Hub West, to provide an insurer perspective on cycling with your insights on health and importance of behavioral change for accident prevention, in particular on stopping the use of mobile phones on the bicycle. So impressive figures. So Achmea Interpolis is managing behavioral change with a population that is novice to cycling. Thanks to all three of you to share your vision in part number 1. I need to go quickly because there's not much time left. So in part number 2, end users adopting and developing cycling policies and practices. What were the main challenges to overcome, and what are the innovative solutions to foster more and better cycling practices? We talked with Kevin Main, Chief Executive of Cycling Industry Europe, and he said there's a huge sale in bicycles, but not everywhere in EU. Exciting numbers were coming, particularly in e-bikes. Now people make more and longer trips, climbing up the hills, an important switch to cycling overall. So bike sharing should be in every city, which is not the case yet. But there's no way back, getting back to the 70s. We have the alliances and relations, so do it all together. Henk Zwartouw, VP from the ECF, European Cyclist Federation. He agrees actually with Kevin, the uptake of the cycling trends, but already it was moving before COVID for health reasons like obesitas. And the aspect of culture needs to be taken into account. In the US, for example, during the oil crisis, they ended up with bicycles in garages in the 70s not being used anymore. But we need to prevent this by policies and awareness, but there's a lot of potential. It's still unused, so we need to go through it. Options for user involvement is growing per day, growing different types of bicycles to the market, which is a good trend. And we need to stay and we need to keep invest in cycling because it's cheap. It doesn't even cost us money, it brings us money. And it will be a long-term project. And he refers to the city of Ghent, a very successful case in a very short time frame. Karen van Kluijsen, Secretary General of Polish Network. The trend is not new. It was already initiated in cities for several years, although it will support. We now see the unbalanced, unfair allocation of the current infrastructure. narrow space actually for cyclists, and we need to give space. But a life change event like COVID is a trigger to change from temp change to final change. But we should capitalize on this. And that's where Daniel comes in as an innovation officer from BKK, Center for Budapest Transport. He saw a drop of 90% in transport use, but he could see as well cycling stayed the same. It was very good for Budapest to install these cycling lanes. So it was an interesting and very valuable dialogue, actually, an interaction on the visions from part one versus the trends, innovations, and the recommendations from part two. So actually, to finalize this mobility talks, we all know one car takes up the same space as 5 people cycling, or 20 people walking, or even 12 cycle parking spaces. And we all know, and this is a kind of joke, cars run on money, make people fat, while bicycles run on fat and save people a lot of money. So the two-wheeler is a simple solution to some of the world's most complex problems. It can combat climate change, ease the congestion, and build our human fitness, while your city and your environment will become more friendly and social, since there will be an increase in social interaction between the citizens. So a big thank you for all of you participating in today's event. I would like to ask you to fill in the survey via the link in your email and here below, so you will receive it today. While I would like to invite you for the next Mobility Talks number 5, where we will discuss mobility as a service on the 17th of September at 3 o'clock CET sharp. So stay tuned on our various EIT mobility challenge. Only together we can make things happen and free up space in our crowded city centers to improve our quality of life in these urban areas. Thanks and have a great afternoon.